Welcome to episode 113 of the Sports Geek podcast. This week, I chat with Federico Smanio about football in Italy's Lega B.
Welcome to the Sports Geek podcast, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals.
And now, here's your host, who's changed the Sports Geek Twitter handle 3 times, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. That's right, the Sports Geek Twitter handle has changed 3 times. The word Sports Geek was not available initially, and early on I went with the _ Sports Geek _, which was the worst decision of all time. That was then changed to Sports Geek HQ, which is sort of my alternate Sports Geek handle. If it's not Sports Geek on most platforms, Sports Geek HQ is what it is. It's Sports Geek HQ on Snapchat still. And then finally, in 2012, after catching up with Laura King, getting a bit of a tour of Twitter over lunch, she said, "Why aren't you just plain old Sports Geek?" I said, "Because someone has it." She goes, "Do you want me to check if it's still available? And I'll put the process in place." And so I said, "Yeah, sure, I'd love to have Sports Geek." And the funny thing is, we've helped a few teams change Twitter handles, and Twitter itself doesn't really know how to do the process properly, because if you change your Twitter handle, then your old handle is available, which could be a problem if someone grabs your old handle and starts impersonating you on the old handle. And so what actually happened was I was flying back from the US, and I landed in Sydney and literally found out that the change had happened. And so here I was worried that someone was going to go and get Sports Geek HQ. I hurriedly created another sports account and pointed them back. So it's a little bit of a Sports Geek pro tip. If you're ever going through changing of a Twitter handle, then make sure you secure the old handles and get Twitter to do a switch of the Twitter names. So you've got the old handle. There's nothing worse than someone jumping on the old handle and impersonating you. So that was a really long intro, but my name is Sean Callanan from Sports Geek, and you're listening to the Sports Geek podcast. You might be doing so on iTunes or on Stitcher or on SoundCloud, although with their recent news that they could be going under, I might stop putting it on SoundCloud. But you will find Sports Geek podcast on my favourite podcast app, Pocket Casts. You can contact me anytime, either via Sports Geek handles, or you can find me at Sean Callanan on Twitter, and again, most platforms, or you can use old school. You can even email me. I love getting emails from people listening to the podcast, saying they're enjoying it, saying they've just started listening, or that they've been listening for years now. Sean at Sports Geek HQ will get me. One thing before I get into my conversation with Federico, because Federico is someone who's reached out via Twitter. We've been chatting backwards and forwards for a few years now about all things digital and sport. It's really great to have him join our Sports Biz Slack. I started the Sports Biz Slack community in December. I'm really enjoying the use of Slack. I'm using it across multiple businesses and with a few clients. And I thought it would be a really good tool for people in sports business, people working in sport, to see how the tool works. But then also chat and share best practice, have conversations with people all over the world. So I've set up the Sports Business Slack. It's now over 160 members. A lot of them have been former podcast members, so it's good to see people like Aaron Lavallee, Dwayne Hankins, Russell Scabetti, Todd Cafflish. A lot of the Seat community is in the Sports Biz Slack across 17 time zones. That's the thing that's just completely blown me away. Slack has this ability to say "at here," which is a way to say anybody on the specific channel. And we've got a digital channel, we've got a reading channel where people are sharing the best stuff they're reading. We've got a sponsorship channel, so you can use the here. At here, and it will tag everybody, send them a notification if they're logged in. And rarely are we getting everyone logged in because it's across 17 time zones. So if you're a listener, if you work in sports biz or want to work in sports biz, or really interested in the space and want to connect with some really cool people, please sign up, get an invite. All you have to do is go to sportsgeekhq.com/Slack. The only rule I have is don't be a dickhead. and so far no one has. So yeah, send that in. I'll add you, and yeah, you can then send the other form of communication. You can then send me a DM on Slack. So before we get into our conversation with Federico Smanio, I'm going to say his name a couple of times just to make sure I keep getting it right. Stay tuned after the interview for a special offer for Sports Geek listeners for Seat London. So if you work in sport in London, in Europe, if you can make it to Chelsea in April 21, 22, stay tuned. We've got a really exciting offer. Until then, here is Federico Smanio from Lega Serie B. Very happy to welcome my next guest all the way from Italy, a listener of the podcast, and we've been chatting on socials for a while. So I've been looking forward to chatting with him on the podcast. Federico Smanio from Lega B in Italy. Welcome to the Sports Geek podcast.
Hi, Sean. Happy to be here.
So first of all, just for listeners who don't know their Italian football that well, and I'll put my hand up and say myself, do you want to explain a little bit about Lega B?
Yeah. Well, Lega B is a pretty new thing. It's a pretty new league. We started in 2010, even though the championship is one of the oldest championships, I guess, in Europe and the world, because Serie B championship is there since 1929 as Lega A or Serie A. It's been since 1929, basically. But what happened then is, in 2010, Serie B and Serie A clubs decided to split, and a new league was founded, basically. So I started to work for the league in 2010 with the CEO, and we built a new league. Now we are 25 people, and that's been like a process of 5 years. We've done lots of different things. So we have a new league, basically, with a very traditional and renowned championship in Italy. Basically, Serie B is famous because we grow Italian talents for Serie A and the national team. Alessandro Del Piero, for example, is one of the major talent that grew up in Serie B and then became famous with Juventus and the national team.
Well, Del Piero, very famous here in Australia. He played his final few years with Sydney FC. So, what's it like?
Yeah, that's why I thought.
Yeah, what's it like setting up a new league with such traditions around because all the clubs had long and historic traditions. So what's it like? It's not exactly like the Big Bash in the cricket over here in Australia. It was a completely new league and completely new teams and no history. How did you go about with that small team to be taking these, traditions, teams with long history and then form this new league?
Well, you see, Sean, I think it's a question of positioning yourself as in marketing, right? So we needed to understand what the values of the league are, and we decided that we analyzed, the landscape, and we decided that we couldn't compete with Serie A because Serie A is much bigger in commercial and audience terms. And even, the quality of the game is a bit better than the quality of our game. But we could compete in terms of emotional connection between the fans and their club. And the territoriality, I don't know if you can translate that into English, but the fact that Serie B clubs fans are located where Serie B club are located. I mean, the connection between fans, city, and community and football club is much closer than, for example, with AC Milan or Juventus or Internazionale. They have like an international and world audience. You understand what I mean? So, I mean, the fact is, when we understand the emotional connection and the physical connection between the city, which is the central community, we worked on that. The second aspect we consider is the fact that we grow Italian talents for the league and for other leagues and the national team. So we work with the clubs to see if we could improve the academies and the youngster teams. And the third aspect that we concentrated on was the fact that we needed to innovate. We needed to be a different league, something different in the Italian sports landscape. So we tried to do so many different projects in these 5-year times. And we started a new relationship with fans. We started a new company to renew and rebuild stadiums for the clubs. We worked on the salary cap for the league. And of course, the basic thing that we do is to organize a championship and getting the commercial revenues and the media revenues from Serie A and distribute the revenues to the clubs, sell the rights and distribute to the clubs. So organize a competition and raise revenue, generate revenues for the clubs. Those are the two main things. But then after that, and beyond that, we do so many different things to differentiate ourselves from the rest of the landscape, which is basically all the same in Italy. So this is what we did.
And it's very much when I was looking over Lega B, I went back through my notes, my conversation with Andy Dodd and his conversation around the Football League in England and being that second tier, and the fact that, like you just described then, that the teams still have this grassroots and community feel, and there's a real strong passion and identity with the teams, and it's something that as a league you want to keep fostering that and growing that for these smaller teams, because they're not like the Juventus of the Serie A, but it's got this really the same passionate community feel for every team.
Yeah, definitely. We want to start an international reach because we have a link with the European football, with the European Football Leagues Federation, which is the EPFL. And we participate in international events, Serie B fans are everywhere in the world. I have friends speaking and on social media that comes from the United States or England or Germany or Canada or Australia. They follow Serie B clubs just because they were Italian and they moved abroad. So if you're a fan, you're still a fan of that team, right? But we need to see, the relationship and between ourselves and the clubs, and we need to foster exactly what you said, the sense of community, and especially because the stories come from the fans. We have beautiful stories every day, and our content marketing strategy is pretty straightforward. We just pick the stories from the fans, and we just publish these stories or broadcast these stories, and it works. I mean, we have stories every day from our fans. We have a new program, for example. We go basically every weekend with sort of a journalist. We go to the stadiums, but not to tell the story of the game, but what happens around the game, telling where fans gather before the games, the typical fans, the most famous fans, those people who can tell you the story of the club, where people go eat before the game. So we need to tell a story around football, and we need to foster community. We do that in a storytelling sense, but we do that on CRM as well. We try to gather as much information as we can about the fans, and we send a newsletter which is personalized on the favorite team, which is nothing new in the sports world. But, this is a new league, so basically what the MLS is doing is not reachable by us at the moment, but I see them as a benchmark, for example, in these terms.
Definitely. I want to go a bit into your background. How much do you think? So your background, 10 years as a professional soccer player. How do you think the athlete perspective helps you better tell that story and to understand, I guess, what's happening on the pitch, but then also now to start telling that story online?
Yeah. Well, I consider myself lucky because I've been playing soccer. I don't know if it's better to say soccer or football.
I'm happy for whatever my guest wants to say. I go to several meetings around Australia, and I always call every code football, but I'm happy for you to call it football. I know it's football to you, so it's football today.
Football. Okay, football. I've been a football player for life. I mean, I started playing football when I was 3 years old in the street, which was basically the main way and the easiest way for an Italian kid to play football. We used to play with a paper ball, so we played everywhere. And I started there. Then I found myself I was pretty good. So the local team, which was Padova, which is one of the a pretty famous team in Italy, they took me from my local team, and I started playing with Padova. And then I had this career in football. This helped me a lot in my current job because I had a chance to see the game from within. I mean, from the locker room. The event, the relationship with fans, which is not easy at all in Italy. We don't have, the kind of American, let's say, American culture, the sports culture here. The relationship. We have the ultras group. We have the more fanatic fans that are not easy to deal with sometimes. I had my problems as well because when the team doesn't perform like fans would like. You might have some problems with them. But apart from that,
on that point about, I guess, understanding the athlete perspective. Good friend of mine, I'm sure you know Oscar Ugaz, and you've probably met him a couple of times in his travels around Europe. He posted a recent article on LinkedIn on social media's problem, and I think Arsene Wenger, the boss at Arsenal, sort of put it forward that the veracity at which fans go hard at both players and teams when something does go wrong. Yes, they're there for the good times, but the fact that it is an unfiltered stream of either praise or abuse either side. How do you think you would have dealt with that kind of, knowing the social media landscape as it is now? How do you think you would have coped with that as a player, knowing the conversations that are happening both around players and around teams, but also in some cases, directed to players?
Well, directly linked to what you asked, I spoke with AC Milan recently, and they said that they can't do anything. They can't do any campaigns when the team is doing wrong or is doing bad. For example, AC Milan is not living in a nice period of its life, let's say, and I remember speaking with them, and they told me, when our team is not doing well, we can't do this, we can't do that because. People are angry, fans are angry. So they say, concentrate on the players, concentrate on making a good team instead of, launching marketing campaigns. What I would have done as a player if I lived in another period, because when I was a player, we didn't have social media, and I finished my career, well, there were social media, but not like now. I finished in 2010, but basically, 2008 professional career. So I would open myself up to the fans. So this is the rule number one that we do as a league. Be as much transparent as you can. Start an authentic relationship. At least you can at least tell your story from within, and people might understand. What happens to me, for example, is that when I try to make a point with a fan, and they see that I'm open, and they see that I'm trying to explain to them what happens inside of the organization, they usually, most of the time, they understand our point. They might not agree with us, but they understand the point, and then you get a new relationship with them. So I think this is crucial. It
is pretty vital in that space, and I think when you are talking those really big brands, and I think that's where Oscar's point came from, with Real and the amount of fans that Real Madrid has, and like you said with AC Milan, like just they've got the pure volume of fans, and they may have those fans that just want to complain, but on the other side of the spectrum, you can win over those fans by showing some transparency, showing that you are listening. Obviously, you're not going to make changes on the pitch based on volume of tweets and things like that. But sometimes it is a case of fans want to be heard, and I think it was the main point of Oscar's article. that you've got to take the good with the bad, and you have to balance that out when you are putting out a campaign. There's nothing worse than rolling out a marketing campaign on a 3-game losing streak. But knowing the temperature, what social gives you, it gives you the temperature of the fans, so you know when to pull the right lever on a campaign to know that you'll both get the best results and limit that fan backlash in some instances.
Yeah, you know what, Sean? I think dialogue. I know it might sound odd. Dialogue is the key word here. And I don't know if you know, I'm also the SLO coordinator of the league. SLO is Supporter Liaison Officer. Is a role introduced in European football in 2010 by UEFA, and is a sort of a bridge between the club and the supporters, right? So it's someone who works for the club, but at the same time it comes from the supporter base and liaise between the club and the fans. In Germany, they have like 4 or 5 SLOs. For clubs, we have one, and most of them is not an authentic one. But meaning, when you start a dialogue with someone who is maybe too fanatic or too hardcore fan or diehard fans, they just see the club and maybe they struggle with their own life, and they consider the club, a way to escape from life. You have to understand that point of view as well. But if you establish a dialogue, there's always a win-win for everyone. I mean, and you might find someone. It happens all the time that doesn't respect the community. Is always sort of a troller, you say. Someone who is always arguing or want to complain every time, and you can't do anything about that. But at least in 10 occasions, you get 8 people to start a new dialogue and relationship, and it's always a win.
Yeah,
so
I think you're right there. I mean, we've seen the test case with the New Jersey Devils had that fan council where they had fans sort of being used and resourced to run some of the social. But I think there's a lot of cases where having a closer relationship with key fans, because most of their comments come from a place of love and passion for your club. And sometimes you just need to get them to step down their passion to understand your point. But it's a really good place to open that dialogue. And effectively, I like to call it, that you can build out your digital cheer squad to a point where they start sort of corralling the crowd and controlling the crowd a little, because they start understanding the club or the league's point of view.
Yeah, but consider this, Sean. At the end of the day, who is the club? The fans, right? The supporters. This is not just marketing, it's the truth. I mean, I as a manager, if I'm a manager of the club, I would go. I'll come and go, basically. Even the owner of the club, maybe too often, they come and go. The players will come and go. Even if we have icons, we have myths, that they come and go. But the colors of the club, of the jersey, the idea of the club is made by the fans. And it's transmitted through generations. So that's the only thing that won't die and that won't pass. So we have to foster that. We have to promote that. We have to understand that prior to making any kind of effort to have a good relationship with the fans. So if we don't understand this, we can't work in sports marketing, at least in Italy, where the relationship is, we can't change team and buy a team, let's say as a franchise in the US, for example, when you change and you move team from one city or another. That would be a revolution here. I mean, it would be hard to accept, because the idea, I'm not saying this is always good, but we have a different perspective in considering, the relationship between fans and community and club.
Yeah, I think it's very similar in Australia in that, and I've discussed this with Richard Clark, who was at Arsenal, in that I think sports in Europe and Australia differ to a little degree. The US is they're far more tribal in nature. And it's far more tied, to the identity of the fans. Not saying that doesn't happen in the US. I'm sure there are, there is definitely tribes around teams like the Packers and the Portland Trailblazers and things like that. But I think it is it is a deeper emotional tie, with these long historied sports teams in Europe, in Australia. I agree with you. I can't see many teams. We've only had a couple of teams up and move in Australia, and it has taken nearly 25 years for those teams to grow roots in the region. So it's definitely the fans. The fans own the team, if you will.
Yeah. Well, then I was thinking. There's a discussion right now in Italy on ultras and the more diehard groups, and they want to remove. Basically, I'm not saying they want to remove physically, but they want to remove ultras from the stadium, right? Because they create problems. But what happens when you remove the curvas and you want to make a sort of a substitution of supporters and fans? I'm taking this to extreme, okay? You won't have the atmosphere. And we understand that people, normal people, normal fans, go to the stadium because of the curvas, because they have the chance, because not all the people.
It's a common calling card for football all around the world.
Yeah, they make a season ticket because they know that they're going to get a colored stadium. The atmosphere is going to be hot. I know it's sometimes hard to deal with some kind of fans, but what happened? I had an experience in Sweden recently. It was fantastic. I had a chance to attend a derby of Stockholm between Djurgården and Hammarby, and it was really, really something I wouldn't thought of being into. It's really sort of a fight, actual fight. There were little fights around the stadium, but the effort to control everything, to try and find a compromise between the passion, which is beyond the limits in some cases, and the general atmosphere of the stadium. So they delayed the beginning of the game for 5 or 10 minutes because of smokes and firecrackers, you call them, right? And this is something that we in Italy wouldn't understand. People get crazy because they would say, we can't delay the game because of these stupid people here, because they want to make chaos and whatever. But they understand that the overall experience is made also by the actual people that maybe they create chaos. So I know it's something a bit difficult to deal with, but we need to find the right compromise. Of course, if someone behaves in the wrong way, he has to face some kind of penalty. So we are going through a very strange and very strange time in our lives of Italian football. We need to understand where we're going.
It is. I mean, that problem you just described is one that, I've spoken to MLS teams in the US. I've spoken to A-League teams here in Australia. It is that balance of providing the atmosphere that the active group and the supporters provide with, the balance of, making sure it is safe and it's family friendly. We can get more people to the game because, one creates the other, and it is a fine balance because they provide so much theatre for the game, and they provide this elusive, fan engagement and fan experience, and really help drive that FOMO. I really have to be at the game because the atmosphere is awesome, as well as conversely with the safety aspect. But it's not an Italy problem, or it is, and problem is even probably too strong a word, but it is an issue that sports administrators are grappling with in the football space, and then in other sports they're trying to achieve that atmosphere and in a manner for their sport. So you've got some that are trying to manage it, and other people are trying to create it. So it's not a unique problem. It is happening around the world.
Yeah. Okay.
So I know it's early in the morning, and hopefully you're not waking up your wife and child. So I want to wrap this up. I've got the Sports Geek Starting Five. I've just started doing these random quickfire questions to wrap up the interview. Do you remember your first sports event that you attended?
Yeah, it was with my dad. To watch Padova. It was a football game when I was a kid. I played for Padova, and in the afternoon go to the stadium. So that was fantastic. It was the 1980s. And the stadium was full. People on the houses around the stadium as well. Something that you couldn't see today, and it was fantastic. And that's printed in my memory forever.
And I've been lucky enough to go to a lot of different sports events all over the world. The food vendors vary in quality, but it does seem to be a thing that they're trying to outdo themselves now. What's the favourite food you've ever had at a sports event?
I had a hot dog with wine at the AT&T Park in San Francisco.
It's not a bad place to watch a ball game.
Yeah, well, I'm a baseball fan as well, and I went to the US to have a sort of a tour of a baseball tour, and I know that the AT&T Park is pretty famous for food.
Yes, it is. And I've caught you here in the morning. What's the first app you open in the morning?
If it's not the train app to see if the train is late or on time, is a instant messaging app, either WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. As a team, as a social media team, we coordinate the activities on basically WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. So I admit those are the two apps that open in the morning.
Oh, very good. Is there anyone you think the Sports Geek podcast listeners should follow, whether it be a Twitter account or someone's blog that you suggest they should be checking out?
Yeah, one for sport, one for non-sports industry. I would suggest Social Media Examiner as a podcast. Well, not just a podcast, as a blog or a site. It's very useful. You can get lots of different tips and advice on social media and marketing, and I think it's been a useful resource for me.
Yeah, Mike Stelsner's done a terrific job with Social Media Examiner. And you had another one?
Yeah, definitely. And for sports, I would say the MLS. I think they work really. They have a very nice strategy, content, different possibilities. I envy the MLS. They are a single entity in comparison to what we are now. We are different from the clubs. So we're not a single entity, so they can do much more than we can do.
It does make for an easier league model, I must admit. And Chris Schlosser, who's head of digital there at MLS, he is on my list to interview. I might have to tap Charlie Shin on the shoulder and see if we can tee that up. But yeah, I love what they do at the MLS.
Yeah, they do a terrific job as well with the newsletter, and they have so many different contents, and they know, they know how to do the things. They don't have the same level of football we have here, but apart from that, which is not something small, but apart from that, they're great.
Yep. And the last one, what social media platform is your most valuable player?
As a individual, or
as an individual, either or. Which, if you're picking one out of the lineup, what's your first pick?
Well, I wouldn't say anything extraordinary now, but I say Facebook as a league, because all fans are on Facebook, and so we work on Facebook. We have all the content on Facebook, and we have basically all our audiences on Facebook. Personally, I love Twitter. I've always loved Twitter. I don't use it so much because I don't have so much time, but I love Twitter. Now I'm trying Snapchat, but it's we need to be aware of new things coming up, and I think it's good. It's fantastic, Snapchat as well.
I've been diving in and testing out Snapchat a little bit more this year.
I'm following you.
Well, thank you very much. Your Snapchat handle is the same as your Twitter handle, yes?
Yeah, Federico Smanio, yes.
And for mine, Snapchat definitely is the here and now. And going back to your point on the storytelling element, the ability for, I guess, more so a team to be able to tell that story, especially around game day. Like, I think a lot of the Premier League clubs are doing a good job of, here's the boys, they're arriving, they're warming up, the game's about to start, here's a shot of the crowd. I think if the broadcasters relax a little bit around some of the footage that's used in those Snapchat stories, I think it will have that ability to draw people in. I think the NBA and some of the NBA teams are doing a really good job. If you didn't catch the Stephen Curry Warriors OKC game, like that Snapchat story that accompanied that game really gave you that feel of, wow, what it was like to be there. So I think that's my tip for the 2016. But Facebook is still where everyone is, and that's where all the traffic is driven from. So you're probably now checking the train app to see when the next train is. So I don't want to hold you up anymore. Where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter at Federico Smanio, or on LinkedIn at Federico Smanio, and basically on all major social media platforms. And if you want to follow the league, you can follow us on, or you can check our website, www.legab.it. Unfortunately, for international, this is an Italian site. We have to work on an English version.
But that's why you have Google Translate, Federico. So that's how I was able to read the site. So if you open it in Chrome, it will convert it for you. I will have all of those links in the show notes for this podcast, and also people can chat to you in our growing sports business Slack community. So if you've got a question for Federico about this chat or about Lega B, please just tag him on a post in our sports business Slack community. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast, Federico.
Thank you, Sean.
And I hope that perhaps you can come across to London for SEAT in April. I'd love to catch up in person.
Okay. I definitely try. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Sign up for Sports Geek News at sportsgeekhq.com/sign up now.
Thanks again to Federico. Send him a tweet at Federico Smanio and tell him that you've listened to the podcast. If you are travelling through Italy, please send him a tweet. Tell him you're about. Have a chat, and like I said earlier, you can mention him in the Sports Biz Slack community, because he is part of that. I did do a bit of a tease before the interview with Federico, talking about SEAT London. Speaking to Christine Stoffel, founder of SEAT, both SEAT London and SEAT in the US, in Vegas this year. Tickets are selling, registrations are selling well. So if you're thinking about going to SEAT Las Vegas, you should be booking your accommodation and your registrations right now. But from a SEAT London point of view, I've been given some complimentary registrations from some of the SEAT sponsors that I have the ability to give away. So the only condition is that you work in the field of sport. If you work for a team or a league in the digital department or CRM or in a technology role, you qualify. So simply go to sportsgeekhq.com/SEAT London, SEAT, and then London. If you can't spell London, then you don't qualify. Or you can simply email me if that's too hard, Sean at sportsgeekhq.com, or contact me in the Sports Biz Slack, because if you're in the Sports Biz Slack, you will qualify. And I'll be sending you those links for a complimentary registration, courtesy of the Sports Geek podcast, but then also courtesy of the sponsors at SEAT, who do a terrific job in both providing technology and services to the sports industry, but also supporting the SEAT community. I really enjoyed SEAT London last year. It was a real thrill to finish the event interviewing Mike Gadding, and it was really good to see the collaboration that SEAT is known for to be taken up by the European community, and so I hope to do a few more interviews while I'm over there, catch up with people who I caught up with last time, like Richard Ayres and Ian Tressida from Lords and the like, and have another great conference. It's going to be over 2 days, and the agenda is really, really coming together. Looking forward to catch up with Steve Ziff from the Jaguars, talking about their London experiment. and having games in London and stuff like that, as we did talk about on the podcast. So if you do want to go to Seat London and you work in the world of sport, you work for a team or you work for a national sports organisation and you work in the tracks, digital, CRM, or technology, please get in touch. I've got a limited amount of free passes, and I pretty much want to give them all to Sports Geek podcast listeners. Call me bias. So send me an email or go to sportsgeekhq.com/seat London. Last thing before I go, I was actually on another podcast. I've been moonlighting. That's probably why this podcast didn't come out. I was on Inside Sponsorship by the guys from SponServe. It's their 4th episode. Gave them a little bit of advice early on how to get their podcast up and running. So I was really happy that Daniel Oyston invited me on to talk about digital and sponsorship, because it's something that I'm working a lot in now, doing a lot of work with helping build up the digital capacity and knowledge inside the commercial and sponsorship teams. So you can listen to that. The links are in the show notes. If you forget, sportsgeekhq.com/113. That's this episode. So go to the show notes, but otherwise Google Inside Sponsorship in your favourite on the internet or in your favourite podcast player. You'll find it there. But here's a little grab from the podcast.
This is a piece also that I'm also retraining both commercial execs and sponsors. Don't confuse cost with value. Okay, it might cost $2,000 to create a sign that's going to be posted on the boundary at the NCG. They don't sell it for $2,000 because the value is different. And so it might cost 5 minutes of someone's time to post something on Facebook, but that doesn't mean that its value is worth that amount of time, because you're reaching 60,000, 70,000, 100,000, 250,000 people. So that's the piece that, early on, a lot of digital was thrown in with the steak knives to deals. I had to retrain a bunch of people in the digital and the sponsorship space to say, well, if you're going to give something away for nothing, how is the sponsor going to value it? How is the sponsor going to see it as of any value? And then it's very hard to, double the price of something that's something zero, because, my math still says it's zero.
Thanks again to Daniel Oyston from SponServe for inviting me on the podcast. I'd love for you to have a listen and then come back to me with your questions. Either send me a question and I'll tackle them in a podcast, or I'll just answer them in an email. But for those of you who don't know, sometimes I've had a few people send me a bunch of questions via email. Tom Robershaw from The Pitch, you might have seen me tweet out that article about podcasting. And I've done it with a few university students asking a few questions. I very much stick true to my podcasting core, and I record those answers and send them back. So some of them I use them as inspiration for the podcast, but I might even start using some of them in the podcast itself. So yeah, send in your questions. So until next episode, my name is Sean Callanan from Sports Geek. And until then, cheers.
Like the Sports Geek podcast? Find us on facebook.com/sportsgeek.
Check out which teams work with Sports Geek at sportsgeekhq.com/clients.
Please leave a review on iTunes. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/iTunes. Thanks for listening to the Sports Geek podcast.